I mentioned I'm excited. I'm excited to share with you today Terracotta. So thank you so much for coming. I should probably also say that Terracotta is a massively collaborative project that wouldn't be possible without the support and involvement of partner organizations that you see listed here at the bottom of the screen. But before I really start talking about Terracotta in earnest, I want to do something that might be described as annoying, but I'm going to do it anyway, and that's to ask you questions that you don't know the answers to. But it's okay, there'll be multiple choice and you won't actually receive a grade. So first multiple choice question. What is Ben asking for today? Either A, your money, B, identifiable private data, C, endorsement of an instructional strategy. That one's at least a tricky distractor because I sometimes tend to promote instructional strategies. Or D, Unison members' involvement in a collaborative multi-institutional research project. Maybe this one's too easy. Okay, so that's the first question. Here's another one. Question number 2. Terracotta is an LTI 1.3 app that emits student submission events that conform to the IMS Global Caliper standard. So that's either true or false. 50-50 chance. I'm not going to tell you the right answer. That's going to be part of the fun of this. Okay, question number 3. By when would Terracotta need to be deployed in Unison member institutions' Canvas instances? Either in a few days, May 2022, or June or July or August. Again, I'm not going to tell you the right answer. You'll have to just stay tuned. And then the last question, question number 4. It is better to ask questions blank a learning activity, either A before or B after. It would have been better if I did A as after and B as before. That's like A and B. Okay, I'm not telling you the answers, but instead what I will do is I will actually get started on the presentation. So here's the outline for today. First, I will tell you what Terracotta is, and then I'm going to actually extend a legitimate invitation for you to collaborate with me on a specific research competition that's coming up real soon. Then we'll do Q&A. Because I want to make sure to be able to answer everybody's questions. And if there's time left, then I'll do a quick live demo of Terracotta, specifically showing you how we would set up the research collaboration that is the substance of item number 2. Okay, so that's the plan for today. And I'm going to go ahead and get started on number 1 by saying that we all probably have something in common here, because we're all in Unison, and Unison is steadfastly committed to improving student success. What student success actually is an open question. It's more like an umbrella term that's relatively diffuse and could mean lots of different things at different levels. So nevertheless, I think that it's all something that we share as a goal of not just our collaborations in Unison, but also what the tools and services that Unison provides could potentially support. And again, this could mean many different things. So for example, it could mean identifying what classroom practices result in better outcomes. So this would be perhaps within a class, or even at the instructional design level, what instructional designs increase engagement, or maybe even the case of this semester, what instructional designs decrease disengagement. We also might ask what materials improve performance, what interventions boost grades. This could even be at the level of an entire school if the school wanted to go out and have some sort of proactive advising intervention that might be interested in boosting end-of-term grades on the whole. And across all these different definitions of student success and all these different possible ways that we could be exploring things, they all kind of have a common pattern of what X causes Y. So these are causal statements. And in a lot of ways, figuring out how we're going to improve student success will require us to find causal relationships between practices and outcomes, X's and Y's. And I want to be very clear about something relatively specific about how we would identify these causal relationships. And that's to start by saying that correlational analysis just isn't right for these questions. So you probably already know the old adage, correlation is not causation. But you still might wonder why we can't use the abundant data in the UDP to make causal inferences, right? And the answer is that you can, it's just really hard. So doing causal inference with correlational data is hard. Let me unpack that just a little bit. Again, I think that this is like a critically important bullet, and if this is all you walk away with from today, then it would be not a bad thing. So let's imagine that you observe students who ask questions, for example, in the Engage eText reader. You observe that those students who ask questions in the eText reader also get higher grades at the end of the semester than their peers. So you might think, it might be attractive to think that because the e-text questions happened before the end of semester grades, there's a temporal difference there, that the e-text questions caused the higher grades. But the problem is that the problem with that, makes it really hard to disentangle what I would call a confound, is that maybe it's just the case that higher performing students tend to ask questions in the e-text. That is, the e-text questions don't cause higher grades. It's just that students who will get higher grades tend to do more of this one thing. And it turns out that that's a really general problem. So different students will behave differently. And students who get higher grades tend to, across the full scope of all the things that we might have available at IU, students who get higher grades tend to take advantage of more tools and resources and show higher levels of activity in these things. But it doesn't mean that the activity causes some sort of higher grades or some sort of boost. Inferring a causal relationship from the existing data would require like way more controls and to rule out other possibilities than just a simple correlation. And sorry to just kind of like beat this drum a little bit more. You could also follow this path one level up. So instead of looking at student activity, maybe instead you're looking at instructor decisions. And you find that instructors who do X tend to assign higher grades. Does this mean that X causes higher grades? And the answer is not necessarily. It's just like with what I just said with the students. It might mean that instructors who do X also tend to assign higher grades. And this is true for lots of values of X. So innovative, caring instructors just tend to also be more effective, and they also tend to adopt more tools. So it's not necessarily the case that the tools cause effectiveness. In fact, there's been lots of research that shows instead that it's the instructor's beliefs about the efficacy of an intervention or the efficacy of a tool that can be just as effective as the tool itself at improving student outcomes. Okay, so if we actually care about creating causal relationships, then again, correlational analyses have really big problems. And instead, what I want to suggest is that the easier thing to do, and in fact, the more effective thing to do, would be to conduct an experiment. To understand what works, to understand what improves student outcomes, the most compelling method is to conduct an experiment. This has basically been the story of my whole professional life. So for the past 10 years, I've been conducting experiments in classroom settings and trying to establish insights into how we can improve student success. And I've got to say, it's hard. So lots of researchers don't do this and instead do other things. So yeah, one possibility of solving the difficulty is to embed experiments just where it's convenient, like only in my class where I have control of things. And one researcher's class might not be representative of all the other classes that they'd be interested in describing. Also, sometimes the easy thing to do would be to remove students from natural learning environments, instead to say, okay, come to my lab and do a learning study, which might not generalize to real classroom practice. Also, it's increasingly common for researchers to deploy experiments in bespoke platforms. So to build a learning tool that has research functions built into it. And that's interesting. It's a possible way of getting around things, but it still is not very generalizable. It's bespoke by definition. We tried to get around all this when we did the many classes research project a couple of years ago. And basically, we tried diligently to break free of all these limitations, like to embed experiments where it's not convenient in other people's classrooms, and to do it in the classroom environment, and to use standard tools like, for example, Canvas. And to do that, to do the many classes research project basically took 18 months, starting from a set of recruited faculty who would participate to the final production of a completed data set. 18 months. And that doesn't include like figuring it out beforehand or publishing it afterward. So that's just totally unsustainable. And it's not just me as a researcher claiming that experimental research right now is unsustainable. There's other people who've said this. For example, I like this quote by Jeff Levin, who said, "The requisite resources for conducting experiments are generally far in excess of what most educational researchers could hope to amass in the absence of considerable extramural funding. Consequently, researchers tend to conduct more manageable, less ambitious, and typically less carefully controlled classroom-based investigations." And it's for exactly this reason that we're actually seeing a decline in the amount of experimental research in educational research. So experimental research probably makes up today about 20% of educational research studies. And in the learning analytics literature, it's even worse. So fewer than 10% of research articles even attempt an intervention, even without random assignment. Okay, so it's worth kind of saying something very clearly, though. This is no different from other research areas. So research is a hard thing to do. It's hard to do fMRI research. Multi-site clinical drug trials are hard to run. Protein crystallography is hard. Subatomic particle acceleration hard. But one big difference between all these and education research is that other research areas tend to have tools that ease the burden. And honestly, I've thought about this a lot. I cannot think of a single tool made specifically for easing prospective education research. Our goal with Terracotta is to fill exactly that gap. Here's a timeline of where we've been with Terracotta. At the end of running, or actually kind of in the middle of running the Many Classes project, we conceived of this idea of a tool that would make it easier to do this. And over the course of 2018, 2019, and 2020, we wrote 5 different federal grant proposals to try and get funding to be able to do this. In the midst of reaching out and trying to write funding proposals, we received a really generous gift from a foundation called Schmidt Futures. And from that foundation, we started building a prototype. In the midst of getting the prototype kicked off, we got one award. This was a grant from the Institute of Education Sciences, which is the nonpartisan research arm of the US Department of Education. That prototype build kicked off, and it was in collaboration with Unicon, which I believe to be like pretty much the flagship software development firm in educational technology. They finished an alpha release, which we put out, and it's open source on GitHub. That kicked off some spring pilots that we're running presently and wrapping up at Indiana University. And now, today, a call for collaboration with this tool to try and see whether we can do something cool with it. So Terracotta exists, and let me tell you exactly what it is. Well, first, the word Terracotta is open for debate. I've called it previously a portmanteau, but it's more perhaps like an acromanteau, like an acronym portmanteau. It stands for Tool for Educational Research with Randomized Controlled Trials. And basically, it's an experiment builder that sits inside the learning management system, right now, Canvas. And there's a lot of different properties at the tool kind of architecture design level that's worth kind of highlighting, even before I talk about what the tool itself does. So for one, it's open source. You can go and download it. You can do whatever you want. You could host it. You could branch it. You could do your thing. But alternatively, you could have us host the core trunk for you for free. So Terracotta is not something that I'm going to ask for your money for. So that first question that I asked, let's cross money off the list. We're offering free hosting service through either. It's a true LTI 1.3 tool, which means if you're a Canvas admin, you can deploy it legitimately on a course-by-course basis, and Terracotta will dynamically update its access rules to make courses that have it deployed available instantaneously. It also has a Caliper live event service, so that student activity within Terracotta is emitted according to that standard and could be picked up really easily into the UDP. We have an amazing team. I'll spotlight one who happens to be here. So there's, you know how sometimes you'll meet people and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I feel lucky to have met this person. This is an awesome person. One such person is Harmony Jankowski. So she's Terracotta's project manager. And yeah, I just feel privileged to have her involved. We have some amazing developers working on it. And also we have just a totally legendary advisory board. So yeah, we're receiving guidance from some of the leading educational researchers in the country. It's really special. So let me tell you what it actually does. So first, Terracotta automates random assignment so that you don't have issues of confounds. You say to Terracotta, hey, I've got multiple versions of an assignment, and Terracotta will randomly assign different students to those multiple versions, which come out to be like experimental conditions. Additionally, Terracotta also allows students in the class to have agency in whether they become participants in a study. So Terracotta weaves an informed consent into the process of experiment creation. It actually creates an informed consent assignment in Canvas separate from the experiment that makes it possible for students to decide to or to not participate in the experiment, or to have their data to be included or not be included in data exports about the experiment. So it very much tries to privilege learner agency in whether they want to be involved in research. Additionally, Terracotta links in Canvas to the Canvas gradebook so that you could link an experimental treatment to a gradebook item or any teacher reported score that they wanted to include. For example, if a teacher wanted to include attendance scores into Terracotta, even if that might not be in the Canvas gradebook, they could add it, basically to be able to determine whether the experimental intervention had a real substantive impact on the thing of interest. And lastly, I mentioned this thing about data exports. So Terracotta will there's a button in it that says export data. And when a teacher clicks that export data button, it'll produce a zip archive that includes CSV files that are automatically de-identified. This is otherwise a very cumbersome process to de-identify data and also to join what your experimental treatments were with real student outcomes. If it's de-identified, Terracotta does it all automatically. Okay, at this point, you might be wondering, like, what the heck? You're actually proposing doing like randomized experiments on students in classroom environments? Is that cool? And I want to say firmly and decisively, yes. It's not just a cool thing to do in Terracotta. It's something that happens all the time. Teachers experiment all the time. It's actually considered to be a positive feature of teacher professional development, that they come up with new things, they come up with interventions and innovations, and they try it, unfortunately though, on the full classroom cohort. And what Terracotta does is it makes it possible for these innovations to be things that are actually rendered as real rigorous experiments. So Terracotta makes it possible to run the experiment both in a rigorous way, but also as a responsible way, so that people don't need to be concerned about, for example, there being bias. One way it does this is using within subject crossovers. So instead of saying some students get treatment A and other students get treatment B, we can instead say, hey, let's manipulate 2 assignments and have some students get A and then other students get B, but then for the next assignment, it flips. So there's a crossover, and that means that all students get equitable treatment across both assignments. Again, as I mentioned, Terracotta has an informed consent process, so students can volunteer to participate or not. Students' decisions to participate, whether they say yes or no to informed consent, are hidden from the teacher, so the teacher can't like favor those students who decided to agree. And all student data, again, are de-identified prior to export. If you're a student who decided not to participate, you don't get randomly assigned, so you get whatever the teacher marks as being business as usual in the experimental treatment. And again, you're excluded from exports. So even though it would have been de-identified to begin with, you can still conceal your data. So that's the rundown of Terracotta's features. Let me now give you a very clear invitation to collaborate in the research competition. So right now, the XPRIZE Digital Learning Challenge is going on. And the XPRIZE Digital Learning Challenge basically has a goal of incentivizing the development, demonstration, and deployment of an infrastructure for conducting experiments in learning contexts to improve our understanding of what works in education while saving time and improving learning outcomes for millions of students. Basically what we started with, the importance of improving student success. And for this competition, oh my gosh, I'm getting a phone call. I have to ignore, sorry. For this competition, we should build a system that can conduct rapid, reproducible experiments and demonstrate the resilience and rigor of this infrastructure in a formal learning context. And that's really what Terracotta does. So we're kind of in great stead for this particular challenge. And let me tell you what the actual timeline of this challenge has involved. So the initial entry was back in May of 2021. We did that, it's done. Then there was a technical submission where we described what Terracotta does. That was due in October 21, that's also done. And right now, Terracotta is among the top 10 teams that advanced. So we're involved right now in the pilot phase, which will conclude in July of 2022. And basically, the project is to conduct an experiment and at least 3 replications of that same experiment. In July, we'll submit a project report. And if we're in the top 5 teams, which I think, fingers crossed, we got good standing for, then we'll be invited to the demonstration phase, which would be to repeat basically the same experiment and at least 5 replications. But we're hoping to multiply that by 4, so get 20 classes going with the same experiment. So if we move to the demonstration phase, we'd be interested in running basically the same pilot study that I'll tell you about in a moment in 20 classes across Unizen's member institutions. And this would require that member institution to integrate Terracotta with their campus instance. It's not going to we're not going to charge the institution anything. So again, IU will provide free hosting, and teachers who participate will receive $500 just for participating, again, if we're involved in the demonstration phase. So what's the experiment that we're proposing we all collaborate on? Well, let's just start by saying that the conventional mode of doing education is that we present the learning activity to students, and then we assess how they do after they experience that learning activity. This is like the Socratic method. We assess what you've already learned, what you know. That was kind of turned on its head in the 1990s when people became more interested in formative assessment. So during learning activities, now there's assessment embedded, whether they're adjunct questions in an e-text system or student response systems during a lecture. But there's an alternative view, and that's instead to have assessments occur before the learning activity. what I'll call pre-questions. This sometimes is at the cost of embedded assessments, like those formative assessments, because it's hard to know the timing of embedded assessments, whether that's pre or post learning. But pre-questions might even exceed the benefit of the testing effect. And the idea is that even though you might not know the answers to assessments before a learning activity, nevertheless, it could increase your focus on the learning activity when you actually do it. We've run a pilot. The preliminary pilot was run at Indiana University, and we manipulated in Terracotta 2 different assignments where some students would experience pre-questions prior to watching a video. Other students would not see pre-questions prior to watching that same video. And then there was a flip. And then later on, there was an exam where students answered all the questions that were pre-questions and post-questions. These videos were delivered in Terracotta, and we instrumented a YouTube player to be able to record every individual click that a student made in that player, so that, yeah, we could infer basically how long students had spent watching the videos. We could reconstruct what parts of the videos students watched, at what speed, whether they were in full screen mode, all sorts of cool stuff. But what we're finding from this pilot is that when students see pre-questions, they actually spend less time watching the video, and they also tend to jump around the video even more. So this is a much more nuanced story than the citation that I showed you on the previous slide that said that maybe pre-questions cause more focus on a learning activity. So instead, it might be the case that pre-questions cause students to get involved in some sort of a search process where they're looking for the answers in a learning activity that follows the questions. And this is what I'm very excited to continue to explore and to start to scale. So here's my very clear invitation for involvement if we advance in the competition. So first, we're interested in up to 4 Unison member institutions other than IU. IU's already in, so if you're here from IU, don't worry about it. You're in already. But if you're not from IU, I would love for you to be able to participate. Just send me an email. Okay, that would involve inviting you to install Terracotta in your campus instance, and then to help me recruit 4 instructors at each institution. Not too many. Each instructor who is recruited will create 2 shortly, up to 5-minute instructional videos that'll be posted on YouTube, unlisted. They'll author 4 or more questions corresponding to each video. They'll include these 8 questions total that they author on their next class exam. And they'll set it all up in Terracotta during the fall 2022 semester, so before August. And we'll help with that, with our assistance. They'll also receive $500 that will come from Unison, again, just for participating. And if we win the runner-up prize, if we're one of the top 2 teams, but not the number 1, so if we're the second team, then each of the 20 instructors will receive $2,500. And if we win the grand prize, then each of the 20 instructors will receive $5,000. We're excited to be able to share in prize funds. Okay, that's my rundown of the invitation. And now is when I'd like to be able to spend a couple minutes answering any questions that anybody has. So at this point, even though we've been talking about it only for like 35 minutes, any questions that I can answer? Feel free to just unmute, or maybe there's questions in chat. Oh, you've got a lot of answers in chat, actually.
I have a quick question, Ben.
Yeah, please.
I mean, but if anyone else has a question instead, since I'm the session host, I don't want to take all the time.
You got me all curious.
But yeah, so the LTI 1.3, and admittedly, this is a little bit of a, I don't know, technical question, or if you've had conversations with Derek on the side that I may not know about, that's great. I'm just wondering, are any of the events that are being launched through Terracotta hitting any of the UDP instances now, or how are you guys managing those events?
Not yet. Yeah, so it's been, because of the way that the pilot has kind of rolled into at IU, we haven't hooked up the connector between Terracotta and UDP yet. So right now, I only see the de-identified events that come out through the data export. So it's worth saying, when a teacher clicks that export data button, they also get to see the individual clicks with timestamps and all that fun stuff. Again, just de-identified.
Okay.
So yeah, no, once Terracotta reaches a different phase of Indiana University's pilot, then we'll hook up Terracotta to the UDP. And also this would be part of the integration process. For example, like Penn State, if Penn State wants to participate, then yeah, as you're integrating it, we would ask for a Caliber key that we would that we would use with Terracotta, and it would have a URL to send it to.
Gotcha. Cool.
Good question.
Yeah, and then kind of a follow-up. Does Terracotta mint its own IDs for these assignments? So like if there's, I'm thinking of, and perhaps I don't know this the entire timeline, but I'm assuming there's an assignment that exists, right? An assignment is created, and then it runs through, probably the simplest way I could say it's just like it runs through Terracotta, and then there's this A and B version, more or less, right? So is there an A ID and a B ID, or is it still that same ID? Is it duplicated or?
So as far as Canvas is concerned, there's only one assignment that has a Canvas assignment ID. And you can imagine that being an external tool assignment. So the substance of that is managed in Terracotta. So it's so Canvas has a bucket that contains a Terracotta assignment. And Terracotta does weird things. It's like Quicksilver. So it makes it so that some students, when they look at it, they see B, other students look at it, they see A. What that A and B is in Terracotta is defined by a treatment ID. And the treatment ID is included in extensions in the Caliper payload.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect.
So yeah, we make our own and they're globally unique.
Gotcha. So the crosswalk back to Canvas is really seamless.
Totally.
It's just
yeah,
you look for that treatment ID to know who you're looking at and who saw what.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Ed, are you interested in like specific types of classes? Like as you're doing this, I'm teaching this semester. I'm not teaching in fall, so I can't do it for you. But I teach something that has, I mean, there's not a lot of specific multiple choice answers, or there's like all of, it's very hard for me to distill grammar and grammar practice, because the outcome is that the students need to be able to see something and identify the problem with it. And that problem can be complex. There can be like 4 grammatical issues or 4 stylistic issues in a single sentence or paragraph. So it's very, very different than memorization style. Are you looking for certain levels of faculty, levels of courses, like 100 level, 200 level, you want applied level, you want like, are you trying to narrow this in order to have it more generalizable? Because I know that a lot of the ways that this stuff started for you was teaching intro psych, which has a lot of, memorization stuff.
Yep. So I really like the way that Veronica Yan answered a similar question during the keynote, which is basically that my bread and butter as a psychologist is variability. So I love situations where you find that the thing that we expected didn't play out in this new context, because it means that there's a specificity that we otherwise didn't understand. So I favor the more diverse sampling approaches, which is basically to say, no, I don't have any constraints about exactly how people do things. Instead, I would hope that, again, they would be able to make a video about something and they ask questions about that thing prior to students watching that video. So if it's about like, how we structure a paragraph, then that's great. And even if the assessment for that might extend beyond answering those questions, I still would be curious to include it. I don't have specific requirements about like whether it's freshmen or seniors, although I will say that I haven't figured it out what it is yet. There's probably going to be a minimum class enrollment size to participate, just because there are like statistical requirements for the XPRIZE rules. Yeah, but so, I mean, that's specific. Like if you've got 5 students in the class, we probably wouldn't even be able to get any estimate. And that would be problematic from the perspective of the judges. Yeah. Jesse, that's awesome. I would love for you to pass it along. I could answer more questions, or I could also quickly show you how it looks and works. We got till 2 my time, right? We got till the top of the hour.
Yep, we have about 10 more minutes.
Okay. Let's see if I can build an experiment in 10 minutes. That's like, again, it took 18 months before. Let's see if we can do it even faster. So I think it's possible. Let's go over here. I got it kind of set up to be able to implement. In, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. In an Indiana University instance of Canvas. So you can see now, hopefully, a Canvas course site. Yes? Maybe? can't see anybody, but I'll just
Yep.
trust them.
Yep, we can
Okay,
see it.
Terracotta exists as a left navigation menu item. So if you click on it, it'll open up Terracotta in a new tab now. And we can go ahead and create our first experiment. And I'm going to set up basically a simplified version of what I would invite instructors to do for this XPRIZE competition. So I'll click continue, and I'll say this is in XPRIZE demo pre-questions study. And this is a description. I happen to know what this is about, but imagine that you would be able to potentially add descriptions that could be included as metadata in your experiment export if you wanted to articulate what the hypothesis is or something. I'll click next, and I'll type in the two conditions. This is pre-questions and no pre-questions. Click next. For the experiment that we'll do with, for the XPRIZE competition, every student will experience all conditions. Again, it's that within subject crossover to equate experimental treatments across students. But for demo purposes, to make it go more quickly, I'll just do only one condition so that we can get through it in 10 minutes. Here's that part where I said an instructor could identify what the default treatment is in the event that they don't want, in the event that a student doesn't want to participate, then they won't be randomly assigned and they should just get business as usual. Here I'll say that no pre-questions would be the default treatment. And I'll click next. We've set up the design of our experiment. Next section would be to create, to determine how students become participants. So this is the participation section. I'll click continue. In this case, we'll invite students to consent. It's worth saying that you could, if you needed to, automatically include all students in an experiment, but we try to avoid that. In fact, if I click select, there would be a warning menu that says, are you sure that might not be ethical? So yeah, we'll invite students to consent. I'll click select. And what this will do is it'll actually create an informed consent assignment. So that assignment needs a title. I'll use the title Invitation to Participate in a Research Study in this class. Click next. And I've already gotten IRB approval. So I've got a PDF here that is our IRB informed consent file. And I'll drop it here and click next. I can decide how students are distributed to different treatment conditions. In this case, I want students to be evenly distributed between pre-questions and post-question. I'm sorry, pre-questions and no questions. I'll click select. And now we're done setting up the participation workflow. Next section. Here we'll set up assignments that really are the quicksilver. This is what is manipulated in an experiment. I'll click continue. Group 1 will receive pre-questions. Group 2 will receive no pre-questions. Now I get to decide exactly what those assignments are. So I'll click next and create an assignment. This first assignment, we'll just call it, I don't know, assignment 1 equals sign. I haven't told you yet what these videos are about, but this first one is about how children have misconceptions about what the equal sign actually represents. So I'll click next. And I'll make the pre-question version of this assignment. This treatment, we'll call it like A1 pre-questions. And I don't need to have instructions or description. I'll just head straight to adding these pre-questions to this assignment. My pre-questions are multiple choice. So here's what the question builder looks like. And I'll paste a question in here. When elementary school students in the US are asked to define the equal sign, which of the following is one of the most common responses? I'll add options. There's going to be 4 of them. One side is the same amount as the other. It means equal. It means the answer to the problem. Or it's the minus sign. And it turns out that the misconception is option 3. So children oftentimes think the equal sign is equivalent to saying answer the problem, and not that one side is the same amount as the other. We don't expect students to know the answers to these questions because they haven't watched any videos, they haven't read anything about this. So I'll keep this as 0 points. But as you might imagine, if you were running a real experiment in Terracotta that had, like, for example, your weekly quizzes, you might actually want to make this worth more than 0 points, but we'll keep it at 0 for now. And just to simplify things, let's imagine that there are 3 other questions that I add, but I'm not going to do that right now. Let's instead add a page break so that students actually need to click to continue before they then see a multiple choice question. And this multiple choice question will actually be a YouTube video. So I've got a YouTube video over here that explains children's misconceptions about the equal sign. What I'd like to do is share it, get some embed code, I'll copy the embed code, and go back into Terracotta. And if I just paste the embed code right in there, it'll populate the YouTube player. This one, I'll make it worth 1 point because I actually want students to watch the video. And there's only one option here, which would be to confirm I confirm that I have watched the video. So that'll be how students get credit for having done the assignment. And that's pretty much it for the pre-question version. I'll click continue. And now I've got to make one more version of assignment 1 to be able to have balance. So I'll edit assignment 1 and I'll create the no pre-question version. This will be A1-no pre-questions. And here I'll add a multiple choice question that's not going to be a question about elementary school students in the US. I'll just go straight to adding in the YouTube video. Oh, I still have this. I'll add the option, make it right. This is worth 1 point. Go back to YouTube. I'll copy the embed code, plop it in here. And now I've got a version of the assignment for students who get it randomly assigned to the no pre-question version or who don't agree to participate, and this will be the default treatment. So now I've got a complete exposure where there's one assignment with 2 versions, and I've created both versions, so I can click finish. Okay, how did I do that? It was less than 10 minutes. So I've set up an experiment in less than 10 minutes, and now I can walk you through a little bit of what's going on. But maybe I should say quickly, does anybody have any questions so far? Like any things that were confusing there? So I've got a design. I can go back and edit everything that I just said in the builder. I've got assignments if I needed to change an aspect of the assignment. And while we were doing this, Terracotta did some amazing things behind the scenes in Canvas. So let's go back to our Canvas page and press refresh. If I go to the assignments tab, there will be now 2 assignments. One is the invitation to participate in the research study, and the other one is the actual assignment that will be randomly assigned for students who agree. So this, like most things in Canvas, you need to publish or perish. So one could set up what the deadlines are and what the point values here, but I'll just go ahead and publish them so that as a student now, I'll go to another window here. I'm logged in as a student to the same course. I should be able to go to the assignments and actually see it work. So here's the fun part of a live demo. I'll go to the invitation to participate in a research study in this class, and Terracotta loads, and I see the prompt where I could agree to participate or not agree to participate and review the consent form. I'll agree to participate and click submit and successfully submit consent. Okay, and now I'll go back to assignments and go to the actual thing that gets manipulated. I have no idea what version I'll get because again, it's random. So drum roll. Hey, I got assigned to the pre-question version. So here I can say it means the answer to the problem, but I could also select anything because nobody's going to get credit for getting this right. I'll click next, and then there's the opportunity to watch the video. The YouTube player again would record every click that I have in it, and then when I'm done, I could confirm that I've watched the video. Click submit, yes, submit, and because it's an LTI app, then I should now have a grade in here. So oh, I would have to go and unmute it, but you get the idea that grades would be automatically passed back to the grade book. And then the instructor has the privilege of being able to release grades at whatever time works for them. So that's the rundown of what Terracotta does. And basically we're inviting instructors to do this, although they would also need to make their own questions and videos. So it would probably take more than 10 minutes. But the setup part of implementing an experiment in Terracotta is remarkably streamlined so that you can do it in a short demo like this in a webinar. Okay. Legitimately, any other questions? Thanks, Jesse. Okay, so if not, then I should say again very clearly, like I would be very keen for you to let me know if there are teachers in your schools who would like to participate, but also I think that it's worth saying that the real barrier to participation in this study is that your institution agrees to integrate Terracotta with a Canvas instance. And that's probably something that should happen relatively quickly because the integration process usually involves a security audit and some sort of like service contract. And we're good with that. We've actually got experience setting that sort of stuff up, but it should probably initiate sooner than later. So both Harmony and Harmony put our email addresses in chat. Thank you, Harmony, you're awesome. If you have any questions or have interest, then please just let us know and we can help walk through the process. So with that, I'll stop talking. And if there's other questions, feel free to send them over to me.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording and stop the transcription now.